Hello everyone. Welcome back to Aero League Racing Tier 1. My name is Aman and you all join us today for the French Grand Prix. We should be getting started very soon now. I think only a few more minutes left before the lobby gets underway. So until then, get comfortable, maybe grab yourself something to eat or drink, grab a loved one, and yeah, we should be getting started very soon. Right then, before we get started, why not take a look at the standings before the start of this race? So at the current moment, BR4 leads your championship with 113 points. Following right behind him in P2 in the driver standings is Mitchell with 105 points, followed by Joe Royal with 87. Next we have in P4 Big Bambino, who's in there with 74 points, followed by Stell in P5 with 54. The rest of the top 10 would be Elite, Typos, Jaguar, Ella, and Jacko. And that will do it for the driver standings. Looking at the constructor standings, Red Bull currently lead the top of the grid with 117 points, followed by Ferrari in P2 with 109. Closely following them in P3 is the Williams team with 106 points, and Aston Martin with 94, and the Mercedes team with 88. The rest of the top 10 would be the Haas team, followed by McLaren, followed by AlphaTauri, then Alpine, and then rounding off the grid, it would be Alfa Romeo. So, we're obviously past the halfway point of the season, and we are at an interesting track, France, a circuit which is very dependent on, lower wings, higher top speed. So, it should be exciting to see how this race comes along. And yeah, I think we've gotten the go-ahead from Mitchell as well to get the Grand Prix underway. Ooh, I apologize if you guys heard background noise there. But yes, gotten the go-ahead from Mitchell, so just a few more seconds now, and we should begin the qualifying session. Hello, Saeed. Good to see you as always. I saw a party, your PlayStation party, and I was half tempted to join, but there wasn't enough time, so maybe some other day. I can like I can like posts from the comment. Yo. Yeah, maybe some other day, Saeed. We'll end up joining your party and we'll end up talking for a bit. And the friendly sportsmanship in chat with good luck wishes going to everyone. Ah, I think it should be a very competitive race. I know we don't have nearly a full grid, but regardless, I think we should still have enough drivers to put on an entertaining performance for all of us. I'm sure we'll have some great racing and some wonderful overtaking. There is a chance of rain, as there always is at every circuit. Well, almost every circuit, but France being a bit notorious for those wet tracks. So we'll see how the weather forms going forward. Right, well, clear skies surround the track at the moment. That's what it seems like, at least. So I think it's safe to say that we should be having a dry qualifying at the moment. So, right, who will be the first driver to go out at the moment? We see no actions as of yet. And looking at the track map at the bottom right, we can see it's a very top speed dependent circuit. So I can't imagine that a lot of drivers will be running high wings around here. And I would certainly hope that they aren't. And surprisingly, still nobody going out into the pits as we see a bit of action there in the Mercedes garage. That is Stell, who's, I believe, beginning to make his preparations to step out onto the grid. And actually, never mind, there are a few drivers who have actually decided to finally leave. So Young Thug at the moment going to be the first driver out on the grid, in the Haas, of course. And we will be riding on board with him, assuming that he can set the first time lap here at France for us. And this will give us a good chance to run through the track and understand what kind of a layout that all the drivers are going to be dealing with. So This is Sector 1, of course, the tight, twisty section near the end of it. Very easy to unsettle the car here, especially on this fast right-hander that's about to come up right here. It's a double right-hander, but it's so easy to lose the power, to lose the car, especially if you're too quick on the power on the exit of the corners. But this would lead you straight into the first DRS zone of the circuit, and that's obviously in the middle or heart of Sector 2, heading down towards the fast chicane as well. So at the moment, it seems like Young Thug, followed by Joe Royal, is out on track, followed by Adam. We'll keep a track on those three at the moment to see who will be the first driver to really, well, assuming Young Thug can keep it clean, then we should be expecting him to set the first lap time of this race. So we'll see how this progresses now. A few drivers still in the pits. We can see Italiano. Italiano is actually racing for Tier 1 today. So we have a super sub, thankfully, dropping by. He's still in the pits though, followed by both the Red Bull drivers, Miesco and BR4. Actually, now they're finally making their way out, so maybe a bit of team strategy there to give the other person a bit of slipstream to help them out. But regardless, Young Thug coming through the final corner of this track, and with DRS wide open, now begins the first timed run here at France. We can see the Alfa Romeo of Italiano coming out on his left-hand side there, and coming through turn 1 and 2, keeps it very nice and tidy. Nearly goes over the curves there and could have invalidated his lap time, but he keeps it very nice and tidy. And heading towards this tight, twisty section that we talked about earlier, where it's so easy to unsettle the car. We'll have to see if he has a bit of snap of oversteer, but no, by the looks of it, it looks like Young Thug, and that's exactly what we were talking about there. That's exactly what I meant, that if you go too quickly on the power there, you're definitely going to lose out, and unfortunately, Young Thug showing us a prime example of such a thing. I guess our attention will now go towards Joel Royal, who was the second driver out on track, and now will be most likely, most probably, the first driver to set a lap time at France. So watching his lap progress now. If you're following the track map on the bottom right, then don't be fooled that at the moment the Alfa Romeo of Italiano is on an out lap, and unfortunately the Haas that we see on the track map is also belonging to Young Thugs, who won't be setting any competitive lap times this time around. So we do have Adam right behind them though. But going back to Joe Royal as he's coming through the last few corners of this track, also a very tricky pit entry here. A lot of people somehow miss out on that. I've seen some drivers struggle to keep it within the white lines as they're heading towards the pits. But regardless, coming towards this very slow right-hander, Joe Royal now making his way towards the line, DRS wide open. What will be the first time set for France? It will be a 1:30.6. Looking down at Adam, who is now making his turn and making his way across the line. What time will he set? Sets a 1:30.9. So currently at the moment we can see Joe Royal is on provisional pole. We can see Mitchell on a run of his own coming through the final corner. And Stella actually finishing with a 1:31.1. And now Mitchell coming across the line. What time will he set? Manages to set a 1:30.3 and takes provisional pole. We can see Big Bambino with a 1:30.5 places himself in P2. Unknown Elder with his 1:31.1. Unfortunately, not a very competitive lap time from him. Sits in P6. We can see Miesco has unfortunately invalidated his lap. BR4 on the other hand, just starting off with Sector 3. Italiano on a run of his own, but a bit far behind at the current moment. Oh, I'm sorry, I had to spectate BR4 there. So Miesco also setting a lap time behind him, but unfortunately has invalidated his run. So I'm not too sure how much of that slipstream advantage he'll really be, if there was any really, to help Miesco out there. But BR4 regardless, coming through the final corner, we do have a yellow flag in Sector 3. That is Miesco, who is dramatically slowing down, possibly to make way for the other drivers. But regardless, BR4 comes across the line and sets a 1:30.4, only roughly a tenth off of Mitchell, and manages to put himself in P2. We see Young Thug and a few other drivers making their runs now. We can see Italiano coming through the final corner of this track. He is our super sub for this race in the Alfa Romeo, and with DRS wide open, it doesn't look like he's going to be setting any competitive lap times compared to the rest of the drivers, and as he sets a 1:33.9 and slots himself in P10. Miesco has now begun his second run after invalidating his first run. Typos also on his second run at the moment, as most of the drivers have now come back into the pits and prepare for their second runs hopefully later on in qualifying. So the only drivers who have currently not set a lap time as of yet is Young Thug, Miesco, and Typos. We can see Young Thug is currently out on an outlap, and Miesco, unfortunately, for the second time in a row, invalidates his run. And that must be extremely frustrating for the Red Bull driver, as he's probably going to have to head right back into the pits and switch off of those worn out softs. Bringing our attention to Typos, who is currently in P13 without any lap time set at the moment. I want to say roughly halfway through Sector 3. Currently, provisional pole time is a 1:30.3, so we'll see if he can slot himself anywhere near the top 5 at the moment as he approaches the final 2 corners of this track, as he manages to avoid the traffic of the Red Bull. And now Typos coming through the final corner of the track, when with DRS wide open and coming across the line, he manages to set himself a 131.1, so nothing too competitive from him either. He slots himself in P8 ahead of Pyro, Jaguar, and Italiano. But he would have wanted to definitely set a more competitive time than that. So you can see Young Thug goes extremely wide there. It seems to be he's on a run. I'm surprised he didn't invalidate his run there after going off the track so widely. You can see a bunch of drivers now back out on their outlaps. We'll take a look at that once Young Thug actually crosses the line. And actually, while we have the chance, let's take a look at who's coming out first. So, as I was spectating through, and I saw Big Bambino unfortunately spins his car around there. Luckily for him, it is his outlap, but those soft tires will not be happy about that. Definitely is going to be wearing them out and causing a bit of damage to them. Young Thug, on the other hand, coming through Sector 3 at the moment, has a bit of traffic in front of him in the form of a Williams. Hopefully they won't hold him up too much, as the Williams now is beginning their time run as well. Maybe the slipstream will give him a bit of an advantage heading down the pit straight, and with DRS wide open, what will Young Thug set for himself? He comes across the line and sets a 130.8 and manages to push himself up into P5. We can see Mitchell now beginning his timed run. Bambino unfortunately invalidated his outlap, so that doesn't really make a difference. I believe Joe Royal is out on an outlap at the moment, so we'll spectate him. We can see Mitchell behind him. Young Thug also following closely behind, but we already saw the time that he managed to set for himself. So Joe Royal currently at the moment does manage to set a purple Sector 1, is roughly 3/10 off of provisional pole time. Is currently sitting in P4, and with 8 minutes 50 left on the clock, he still has a lot of time to definitely improve, so we'll see how much he's up by the end of Sector 2. Coming through Sector 2, he is roughly 3.5 tenths up on his time, setting a purple Sector 2 as he's done it. Joe Royal definitely seems to be on an absolute flyer at the moment. Strong performance from the Williams teams early on in the qualifying session, as both Bambino and Joe Royal are sitting in P3 and P4 respectively. We have another yellow flag in Sector 3, and that seems to be the Haas, but I'm not too sure what's going on there. I know it is Young Thug, so he must definitely be, either he's out of fuel or something or the other. Regardless, Joe Royal, who was currently in P4, we saw he was 3.5 tenths up on his time through the end of Sector 2. So what time will Joe Royal set? As he crosses the line, he manages to set a 130.1 and manages to take provisional pole. But with Mitchell right behind him, will he be able to hold on to that, as Mitchell now comes across the line and sets a 130.15 and barely misses out by roughly 5 tenths of a second. And with that, Joe Royal now sits in provisional pole. We can see BR4 on a run of his own. I'm sorry about that, my ringer going off. We can see Adam now on a run of his own. Oh, as a Williams and a Ferrari both stopped out on track. I'm sorry, guys. Fucking phone calls are annoying. Regardless, and Bambino's actually retired from the session, so I was talking about the strong performance he had. I didn't mean to give them the commentator's curse there. We can see Stella on the other hand, roughly 3 tenths up on his time. He has set a 131.3, so assuming that he can keep up the space, he'll push himself up into the 130s. But I think he's still a bit too far back, unless he can make up a dramatic amount of time to really take away provisional pole. He is roughly a second off, and those clear skies that we were talking about have actually gone away, as I can see very small amounts of rain now landing on the circuit. So with rain now approaching and landing on the track, I doubt there will be really too much of an improvement drivers can make. We can see Stell how slow he was on the exit of that corner. And with yellow flags out on track, Stell comes across the line and sets a 130.8 and does manage to promote himself up into P7. But with only a few more seconds left to go, and with rain now out on track, I very much doubt that any driver is really going to be able to improve, especially as track conditions get slowly and slowly deteriorate. As Joe Royal and Mitchell both now enter the pits, we can see BR4, who was on a run of his own, unfortunately cannot capitalize with the rain now on track. Most likely he's going to stay P3 with a 130.4. Adam now back into the pits. Stell currently out on track as Italiano now retires from the session. And I'm assuming most of the drivers now are now going to begin to retire from the session, as there's really no point in really going out on track anymore. So Unknown Elder actually just decided to go back out on track. Is on an outlap at the moment. I don't really think there's any purpose to it, but you can see Mieszko also on an outlap. I wouldn't be surprised if he decides to just come in at the end of this one. Ooh, we can see how squirrely he's gone there. There's not even that much standing water out on track, but it just shows those softs are not built to handle even the slightest bit of wet conditions, as race control now disables DRS. And Mieszko actually attempting to go for a run here. I mean, a 130.9, there was really no point going for a second run, but that is the decision he's made ultimately, so nothing can change that. Right. Well, there was definitely a bit more time left to go in the session there, as I'm not too sure, I believe that's BR4 whose Red Bull is currently stopped out on track. But ladies and gentlemen, that is going to most likely bring an end to our qualifying session. So Joe Royal manages to take provisional pole with a 130.1. Actually manages to take pole position with a 130.1. Mitchell in P2 finishes off with a 130.15, roughly 5/10 behind Joe. BR4 in the Red Bull takes P3. Bambino in the Williams takes P4. I'm sorry, I'm not too sure if that's the Williams or the... Oh, no, it is the Williams, yeah. Bambino in the Williams takes P4, and Adam in the McLaren sits in P5. And that will round off your top 5 for the start of this race. Right, well, I was I was thinking that drivers are going to actually start to um, just retire from the session so that we can just move on to the actual race. We can see Unknown Elder struggling with his soft tires. Jaguar currently out with his soft. And surprisingly, Stella deciding to go out with his intermediates. Can't imagine a reason why. There is only 2 minutes 40 seconds left to go in the session. I mean, drivers might as well just call it quits at this point. Jaguar actually opting to go for another run on his softs. We're trying to complete his current lap time at least. We can see Unknown Elder has now also retired. So the only drivers currently out on track are Stella and Jaguar. So I guess we'll just wait for them. Right, well, I had to take a bit of a break there from commentating as there really wasn't much to talk about, but that is the end of the qualifying session, so we're all set to get the race underway. We can see that there are dark clouds surrounding the track as we're all set to get the race underway, as we'll spectate. Oh, actually, never mind. Wait. Right, never mind. So yes, a few more seconds now, 30 seconds left to go until we begin the race. It'll be interesting to see who's going to be choosing what tire compounds, and if there is rain to be predicted later on in the session, how drivers will respond to that accordingly. I don't suspect that there's going to be too many safety cars out on track today, mainly because there's so much of a runoff area that I'm sure drivers will be able to save their cars unless they make a dramatic error or have a collision with another driver, but I guess time will be testament to that. So now then, ladies and gentlemen, let us ride on board with Joe Royal, who has managed to take pole position and will be starting this race off for us as we take a quick look at what tires every one of the drivers are running. So we can see Joe Royal all the way down to Big Bambino in P4 are opting to run the hard tire compounds. Adam Millsy and Young Thug in P5 and P6 choosing to run the mediums, and we have Stel and Miesco on the hards, and the only other driver to run the mediums is Unknown Elder in P9. So the general consensus at the moment seems to be that the hard tire compound is the more reliable tire to choose at the start of this race, mainly because I'm suspecting that there's most likely rain near the end of the session, so they're probably going to be wanting to drag out these hards for as long as possible. As you can see, drivers weaving left and right, trying to get some heat into their tires. It's so much harder to get some temperature into those hards as well as compared to the mediums, but that is the point of these out laps. As Young Thug has unfortunately left the session, so it seems disconnection errors are haunting the Haas driver as he manages to start from P6 but unfortunately leaves the session. Hopefully he can join back before the start of the race and he doesn't lose out on too many positions at least. Jaguar there, pretty far behind us. There's a McLaren that spun out. That is the McLaren of Adam, as we can see Italiano also spinning out. So two drivers working in unison with each other as Joe Royal now lines his car up with, actually gets reset a bit further back there for maybe pushing the limits on how far he can park his car. So we can see Mitchell actually managed to park his car pretty well. Joe struggling with that a little bit. Regardless, ladies and gentlemen, as we can see in the background there, as Adam gets into the final grid slot, we're all set to get the French Grand Prix underway as we wait for the lights. And we continue to wait for the lights. I can't see the lights, so never mind. I couldn't tell, but it's lights out and away we go, and we're off with the French Grand Prix. Joe Royal gets a fantastic start, but manages to keep the position to Mitchell. Big Bambino managing to get past Mitchell, heading into turn 1 at the moment, and we can see him going side by side with the Ferrari, but manages to make the overtake before the end of the corner. And now it is a Williams 1-2 at the moment. Looking at the back of the grid, we can see BR4 getting very interested on making a possible dive on Mitchell, but Mitchell managing to retain P3 at the moment, and that exit out of that corner compromised him a little bit, as the McLaren of Adam getting very involved now. We can see Young Thug's AI getting into a bit of a battle there with Stel at the moment for P6, and with that, Stel and Unknown Elder managed to get past the ghosted car there, as we can finally get a look at the predicted pit stop strategy. So the hard runners are expected to run roughly 15 laps into this race, so we'll see how this progresses as time moves on and drivers try to strategize how much they want to save their tires. And BR4 now coming under attack from Adam, as both drivers side by side, and Adam actually managing to pull away there, possibly because of him using either his battery or having lower wings, and Adam manages to promote himself up in a P4, but the move isn't done just as yet. We can see the Red Bull of BR4 right in the spoiler of the McLaren. So after that exciting race start, we can see Joe Royal and Bambino are now beginning to pull away. Mitchell now has his own problems to worry about as Adam is right in his rear spoiler. So how will Mitchell defend from this heading into the end of the first lap? And we can see it's compromised him a bit there. Now the the McLaren and the Ferrari going side by side. Adam trying to maybe get a switch back into the next quarter, better run. Doesn't look like he's able to, but tucks right behind into the slipstream of Mitchell and is hopefully looking to make a move heading into turn one. He looks at it, he looks to the side to make a possible dive, but doesn't make anything of it. We can see Unknown Elder about to make a move on BR4, but thinks better of it and decides to back out of it on this occasion. Looking down the grid, we can see Stell now actually managing to get past Young Thug once again, so I'm not too sure what happened there. I thought he definitely made the move, but it seems like if maybe most likely traction issues caused him to lose out on that position. As we can see Adam now once again lining himself up to make another possible move on Mitchell. It is lap 2 of 27, so we obviously don't have any DRS at the moment. So drivers are heavily relying on the slipstream, their wings and batteries to make any overtakes. As we can see Unknown Elder once again looking to make an overtake on the Red Bull of BR4 as Young Thug luckily joins back and only loses out on 2 positions. So Typos now currently sitting in P7. Now Unknown Elder going side by side with the Red Bull and manages to make the move heading down the straight before the next corner even begins and promotes himself up in a P5. And we can see Bambino and Joe Royal getting very close together there. So both the Williams teammates trying to drag each other along to pull away from the rest of the grid. And Mitchell is not enjoying this battle behind him. He obviously would want to catch up to the front of the grid as soon as possible, but with his rear view mirrors completely covered by the McLaren. Actually, never mind. It seems like Mitchell's actually managed to pull away there. So a bit of an error there from Adam causes them to drop down. And now we can see Mitchell getting very hungry and trying to make a possible overtake on P2 in the form of Bambino. And we can see now Unknown Elder going side by side with the McLaren heading into turn 1. And Adam with the inside line manages to retain the position and stays in P4. Lap 3 of 27, DRS now enabled. So as we head down into the first DRS zone, we will have to see if any driver can make any possible overtakes. We can see Bambino and Mitchell are very close to Joe Royal at the moment. So we'll keep an eye on Joe and see if he maybe possibly loses out on 1 or 2 positions here. And here we go with the DRS trains now. Mitchell thought about diving down the inside of Bambino, but thinks better of it. Decides to back out and maybe look for getting a better run, and it seems like he nearly did. Never mind, as Bambino's actually pulling away from the Ferrari driver now. We can see Mitchell trying to find the better line, trying to catch up to Bambino, trying to force him into some sort of error, which is the only realistic way he could maybe get him past him through those corners. Is just by forcing the driver in front of you into an error by just filling up their rear view mirrors, as Young Thug once again unfortunately disconnects from the session, and with DRS wide open heading down the pit straight. Unfortunately, the straight's a bit too short, especially when when you have a DRS train, or especially when you're stuck smack dab in the middle of a DRS train. We see we can see Taliano actually manages to promote himself up into P9. And as I say that, he actually picks up the first penalty of this race. So Italiano picking up the first 3-second time penalty of this race. And we can see now drivers struggling to stay within that DRS gap towards each other. Looking at the back of the grid, we can see Unknown Elder once again looking to make a possible move around the outside of the McLaren. Can't do anything yet as Adam manages to shut the door on him and retains P4. If there's a driver that's been constantly looking to make more and more moves, it has been Unknown Elder throughout the first half of this race, or the first 4 laps of this race, as Miesco unfortunately now picks up a 3-second time penalty. So those medium tires definitely trying to propel him forward, as we can see Adam with his mediums trying to get past the hard runners as soon as possible, as that would just open up that would just work wonders for his strategy as well. So this DRS train is heading down from P1 all the way down into P6. So realistically, any of these drivers really have a chance to take the lead of this race or enter onto the podium. So we'll see if any of them can make it, if any of them make a mistake and compromise each other. Stell now picks up a 3-second time penalty 5 laps into this race, and drivers are already struggling to keep it on the track. And as I was saying, we can see Adam now with DRS wide open. Once again, that DRS train just not helping him out whatsoever. It's so painful when you're in that DRS train because drivers struggle to keep up with each other. As we can see, Typhos now manages to make the overtake on Stell and promotes himself up into P7. But going back to the discussion of DRS trains, obviously once you get stuck in it, it's so difficult to get out of, as you really have to wait on one of the drivers to make a mistake. And we can see Adam now slowly dropping out of that DRS zone, roughly 8/10 away from the driver in front of him. You can see Unknown Elder now trying to get past him as soon as possible. Mitchell still within that 4/10 of a second gap to Big Bambino. So despite the clouds that loom over the circuit, we still haven't seen any drops of rain on track at the moment. So I think it's safe to say that we've gone through these first few laps without any hiccups in form of rain. We can see Italiano getting past Stell and managing to promote himself up into P8. And the gaps between the drivers now slowly widening now. Miesco managing to set the fastest time of the race with a 1:30. I missed it. Never mind. Pyro very close behind Jaguar at the moment. DRS wide open now. The Haas and the AlphaTauri going side by side, heading down the DRS zone. Who's going to come out ahead? It seems like Jaguar with the outside line trying to hold on to that position, and Pyro trying to get the switchback on Jaguar, but unfortunately it just barely isn't enough, and he's going to have to stay back in P12 by the looks of it. Meanwhile, Mitchell 2.5 tenths away from Bambino at the moment, so he's really closed the gap now in through Sector 3. And BR4 seems to be the first of the drivers in the DRS train to break away, unfortunately, down in P6. Definitely won't be too happy with himself. Will be desperately trying to get back within the DRS zone. As we can see now, he's within 8/10 of the car ahead. And Joe Royal and Bambino, both the Williams drivers, trying to pull each other along. Doesn't seem to be working too well for them at the moment, as they haven't really been able to shake the rest of the grid off. And now with DRS wide open, it's going to just make their life that much harder, as we can see Bambino beginning to drop back from Joe just a slight bit. And will this open a window of opportunity for Mitchell, as he thought about maybe diving down the inside but decides to back out of it on this occasion? Meanwhile, Unknown Elder roughly 4/10 behind Adam. Both the medium runners in P4 and P5 trying to keep up with the hard runners. As we can see Mitchell now 1.5 tenths behind Bambino. Waiting for some sort of a mistake, as we can see one there, as a small window of opportunity nearly did open up for him, as they were nearly side by side heading through that corner, but Mitchell decides to back out once again. Just biding his time, trying to find just a better place to overtake him on. Probably a best idea to back out of that, otherwise both the drivers are going to be spinning off. And it is lap 7 of 27, 20 laps to go, and as they come across the line becomes lap 8. So if you can do basic maths, then that means 19 more laps to go. As you can see, Adam roughly 9.5 tenths away from Mitchell, so dropping out of that DRS. nearly dropping out of the DRS. And for P2 on the grid, we can see Mitchell basically pushing Bambino along now. 3/10 to 2.5 tenths separating both the drivers as they come through the DRS zone. And with DRS wide open and Mitchell being that much closer to Bambino, will he be able to make the overtake heading into the chicane? We can see both drivers side by side at the moment, and it seems like Mitchell is going to be able to make the overtake right before the corner even begins and promotes himself up into P2. And Bambino unfortunately drops down into P3, but the move is not complete just as yet, as Bambino can simply just tuck right behind him to the slipstream and maybe wait for another window of opportunity to maybe make that overtake right back on the Ferrari driver. But on this occasion, it looks like Mitchell's actually beginning to slowly pull away from him. And by the looks of it, unless Bambino can force Mitchell into a mistake, which we all know throughout the season and from the previous seasons is very difficult to do, he may be able to capitalize and promote himself back up into P2 right behind his teammates. Looking at the back of the grid, we can see Unknown Elder trying to close the gap to Adam as well. Has been struggling to get past him, as Adam has just had some fantastic defending and manages to shut the door on Unknown Elder. Prevents him from getting through. Looking down the grid, we can see Stell at the moment roughly 5/10 behind Italiano. This is the battle for P7 at the moment. Unfortunately, the rest of the grid a bit too far back and a bit too separated. As we can see, Joe Royal's unfortunately spun out. Joe Royal, who was leading this race, has unfortunately spun out, and it is through the exact section that we were talking about earlier, where it was so easy to unsettle the car, and with that, he's unfortunately lost out on a ton of positions, as he's now finished coming out, as he's now regaining traction on his car in P7. And with that mistake from him, we can see Mitchell now gets promoted up into P1, Bambino gets promoted up into P2, and Adam gets promoted up into P3. So that is nightmare fuel for him. As we can see, Unknown Elder now has actually managed to massively slow down there and actually drops down into P8. What happened there? We saw that he was right behind Adam for the longest of times, but now he's dropped down into P8. Maybe because he had some sort of must have had some issues on his own. But with that, Joe now sits in P6. And it's just made his life that much more difficult to catch up into P1 once again, as he has Italiano right in front of him, 3.5 tenths separating both the drivers. As once again, Unknown Elder... Oh, okay, Unknown Elder goes into the pits, which is why he jumped up a few positions there. So Unknown Elder becomes one of the first few drivers to enter the pits. He does not get a wing change and decides to move on to the hard tire compound, feeling as if there's no real point to staying out on the medium. So let's see how Adam also responds. He's also on the mediums. They are 9 laps old. If he decides to react at all, I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't. But Bambino now with DRS wide open, slowly gaining on Mitchell. Unable to be close enough to make a possible move there, and decides to stay back in P2. We can see Adam Millsy in P3 does have a time penalty of his own. If we can take a quick check, and it is a 3-second time penalty. We can see Stell and Italiano going side by side with each other now, and Stell managing to get past the Alfa Romeo driver and promoting himself up into P6. It's a good thing I caught that at the last possible second. So your ex-race leader, unfortunately down in P5, is 6.5 tenths away from P4 at the moment. He has made it an uphill battle for himself, but assuming that he can keep his head down and keep up the pace that he's shown us in qualifying, I wouldn't be surprised if he does manage to catch up towards the front of the pack, but it's obviously just that much harder now. Bambino, on the other hand, 4 tenths separating him and Mitchell, as he's desperately trying to close the gap as close as possible, so that as they head through the DRS zone, he may be able to make the overtake stick. overtake stick. But when you're 6/10 back on a driver like Mitchell, it just becomes that much harder to get through. So Bambino, unfortunately, too far back to make a possible challenge for P1. Looking down the grid, we can see Italiano once again trying to make a move on Stell. We saw that he got past that Stell managed to get past Italiano earlier. So now Italiano maybe trying to return the favor, as he wasn't able to make the overtake there. As Typos now gets past Young Thug, the AI of Young Thug, and promotes himself up into P8. So in lap 11 of 27, oh, actually, never mind. The overtake battle continues between Stella and Italiano, and now Italiano manages to get past Stella and promotes himself up into P6, as Typos picks up a 3-second time penalty for multiple warnings. But Italiano's job isn't done just as yet. We can see Stella lining himself up to get a better run out of that corner, but unfortunately, that little snap of oversteer must have costed him there. But with DRS, luckily for him, he won't be losing out on too much time. We can see BR4 on the other hand, 2 tenths separating him and Adam. This is for the final step of the podium, of course. And BR4 will be looking to get past Adam as soon as possible. Obviously, Adam on those old medium tires, which will definitely begin to be wearing out at this stage of the race. The hard tires will definitely be the faster tire to be on at the moment. So Adam without DRS to defend from the car behind him, and BR4 with DRS trying to make the move. We can see Adam decides to go defensive, but there was really no point, as BR4 manages to make the move before the beginning of the next corner. And with that, BR4 now promotes himself up into P3 and onto the final step of the podium. And already we can see BR4 beginning to pull away from Adam. So out of the medium runners, Adam. Oh, and we can actually, never mind. I was about to say who will be the first driver out of the medium runners to legitimately come in for a pit stop, and it seems to be Adam. In lap 12 of 27, has decided to come into the pits. Feels like his 14-lap-old mediums have had enough, and will most definitely be switching on to the hard tire compound. Looking up the grid, we can see Bambino being the only driver at the moment to be within DRS range of the car in front of him. So Bambino's done a pretty good job for keeping up with Mitchell. We will have to see if he can capitalize on his pace and maybe actually get past him as well. Adam actually comes out of the pits in P10 as well. "14 more laps to go in this race." P1 to P7, all using the hard tire compounds, and I haven't come into for any pit stops as of yet, with no surprises, of course. Their tires definitely not nearly as worn out as compared to the medium runners, so we'll see if any of the drivers decide to perform an undercut to maybe try to gain an upper hand on the drivers in front of them. You see Endo and Elder actually getting past Jaguar there. Imagine to promote himself up into P11, obviously having the fresher hard tires. He's going to have that pace advantage as compared to the rest of the grid. Pyro catching up to the AI of Young Thug, assuming that he can get past, which he most definitely can. Pyro will be promoted up into P8. Joe Royle, after that pit stop from Adam, actually manages to promote himself up into P4. We can see that gap at the earlier on in the race was 6.5 seconds, as he managed to drop it down to 4.7. So Joe definitely showing the pace that he's capable of showing, and that he showed us in qualifying as he took pole position. Trying to close that gap as soon as possible and maybe catch up to his teammate to help him out. Oh, and as I say that, the commentator's curse comes into full effect as Joe Royle, unfortunately, the nightmare continues as he spins his car around and comes out and now gets back on track in P6. And at the front of the grid, we can see both Mitchell and Bambino have now finally decided to come into the pits in lap 14 of 27. BR4 opts to stay out, deciding that it's too soon for him to go into the pits. So now then, Mitchell now on the move. Does not look like Bambino's going to come out in front of him, so Mitchell definitely got his pit spot on there. And Joe Royle and Stell. So BR4, Stell, and Joe Royle all opting to stay out along with Typos. And Mitchell at the moment comes out in P5. Obviously moving on to the fresh medium tires. Drivers are going to have to be extremely careful while going on the power there, as the tires are extremely cold and it's so easy to lose the car as well. Looking at the front of the grid, we can see Joe Royle is actually trying to regain that lost position to Stell. DRS wide open, but a bit too far back to make the move stick. And now Mitchell with Typos right in front of him. Obviously, Typos on those 14-lap old hards. This is really not a battle he should be battling with the Ferrari driver, but regardless, he's continuing to do so. Mitchell around the outside manages to make the move stick and promotes himself up into P4 with the assist of his freshly put on medium tires. We can see neither BR4 Stell or Joe Royle deciding to go into the pits, opting to stay out for a few more consecutive laps. As we can see, Bambino's dropped down a few positions. Actually, Mitchell's decided to come back into the pits? Oh, no, Mitchell hasn't decided. Typos has decided to come into the pits. Okay, I freaked out there for a second. I thought Mitchell decided to come into the pits once again. But no, he's decided to stay out, and now Bambino gets promoted up into P5 after Typos's pit stop. Adam actually managing to set the fastest time of this race as well. So that will obviously be an extra point to him, assuming that he can maintain that fastest lap for the whole race. Joe Royle now with his DRS wide open, trying to get past Stell, heading towards the chicane. We can see Joe actually managing to make the move before the corner even begins, and regains that lost place that he lost to Stell after he spun out, and now promotes himself into, at the moment, P2, but obviously after his pit stop he's definitely going to be dropping down a considerable few positions. Which it is still surprising to me that BR4 and Joe and Stell haven't decided to come into the pits as yet. It is lap 16 of 27. But as I say that, BR4 must have heard me and now finally decides to come into the pits. Will Joe Royle and Stell follow suit? And by the looks of it, Joe will not, and neither will Stell. Both drivers opting to stay out at the moment. Mitchell obviously closing the gap to these hard runners who have extremely worn out tires. And BR4, where will he come out? He most likely will lose out the position to Mitchell. But hopefully he's actually able to maybe make a possible overcut on a few of the drivers. Actually, never mind. Joe decided. Actually, oh, never mind. I got extremely confused there. So BR4 actually comes out of the pits and comes out in P6 at the moment. Adam in front of him with his 4-lap old hards, but those medium tires are obviously going to be a lot quicker than him. 10 laps to go in this race. Joe Royle and Stell's tires being 16 laps old. Luckily for us, we haven't had any DNS throughout this race, and as a result we haven't had any safety cars, so that's wonderful to see. But that was also predicted with how big these runoff areas are. Assuming if a driver spins out or loses their car, they're actually able to stop it before they drive into the wall. Looking a bit down the grid, Unknown Elder closing the gap to Italiano, roughly 7.5 tenths separating him. BR4 on the other hand, 8 tenths separating him from Adam at the moment. And there's obviously the fight at the front of the grid between Stell and Joe. And once again, neither Joe or Stell deciding to come into the pits, decide to stay out once again. 16 lap old worn out tires they have. So they're definitely really pushing the limits on their hard tire compounds. And as I spectate Joe, we can definitely see how worn out his tires are just simply by looking at them, and the same goes for Stella as well. Meanwhile, BR4 and Adam coming into a battle of their own, and now Adam managing to keep that position there from BR4, but the move is not done yet, as now BR4 goes side by side with the McLaren, and with the inside line, BR4 manages to make the overtake stick, but Adam's not done with him just yet. Even though he's right behind him, they're heading towards the DRS zone, and unless BR4 can massively pull away in the next few corners, which by the looks of it, he actually managed to pretty well, he will be able to most likely retain that position. As we can see Adam now with DRS wide open, trying to catch up to BR4, but it seems like he's a bit too far back on this occasion to maybe make the overtake stick, and will unfortunately have to settle for P6 as BR4 manages to promote himself up into P5. Looking up the grid, I didn't even notice Mitchell now within 0.2 of a second to Stell. Obviously Stell and Joe, neither of them have pitted, and we can see almost immediately after catching up, Mitchell immediately gets past Stell and promotes himself up into P2, and only has Joe Royal right in front of him left to go. So almost instantaneously, it looks like Mitchell didn't even wait a split second, as once again we can see Joe has decided not to pit, but Stell decides to call it quits and finally enters the pits with his 17 lap old hards, and with DRS wide open, Mitchell's trying to get past Joe as soon as possible, but he's just not able to. Joe probably using every bit of his battery to keep that position, but obviously with the faster tire compound, I doubt there's much he can do to really stop Mitchell at the moment. Lap 19 of 27. Joe desperately holding off Mitchell just to get Bambino to possibly catch up to, and we can see that the gap between the drivers has come down massively. This is some great strategic work from the Williams drivers as they're trying to hold up the Ferrari as much as possible. We can see Joe Royal once again, despite Mitchell right behind him with DRS wide open, Mitchell still once again unable to make the overtake stick, and Joe massively slowing down the Ferrari to allow Bambino to catch up. We can see the Williams team working hand in hand with each other as that gap between Bambino and Mitchell coming down to 1.1 seconds. Mitchell showing his teeth to Joe to show that he's not afraid to make the overtake and is now trying to force him into an error. But unfortunately, once again, too far back on this occasion. But with the medium tires, will he be able to finally get past Joe? They're now side by side heading into the next corner, and those fresher tires help out Mitchell as he manages to get past Joe finally after so long, and Joe immediately lets Bambino through, and the gap between Mitchell and Bambino now is within a second. Both drivers are on the 4-lap old mediums. We can see Joe Royal finally heads back into the pits, so that's why Joe Royal hadn't come into the pits. He was waiting to hold back Mitchell as much as possible, and with only 7 laps left to go, it seems like he's really opened up a window of opportunity for Bambino to maybe make an overtake on Mitchell. Fantastic strategic work there from him, from the Williams team, but will it be enough? We will have to see. Bambino actually managing to close the gap to Mitchell very slightly, heading towards the next DRS zone. Will Bambino be able to close this gap as much as possible? We will have to see. 8 tenths currently separating the drivers, and with DRS wide open, he is slowly gaining on the Ferrari ahead of him. Both drivers have their flashing red lights on as well, meaning both of them are below 10% ERS. So with 7 laps left to go, it looks like they've all used up every bit of energy they have. It seems like Mitchell has just about enough more energy to hold back Bambino on this occasion. 6 tenths now separating both the drivers. As entertaining as this battle is, it's only fair that we look at the back of the grid. We can see Typos now right behind Joe Royal. Obviously, Joe Royal seems to be sandwiched by a bunch of drivers who do have time penalties at the moment. So will Typos be able to catch up and get past Joe? It doesn't seem to be the case, as Joe is on 4-lap fresher mediums. Meanwhile, Unknown Elder, roughly 6.5 tenths behind Italiano, who's actually managed to put himself up into P5 after starting nearly dead last on the grid. 5 tenths now separating Bambino and Mitchell. And just as I was talking about Bambino actually closing the gap, we can see Mitchell once again has slowly pulled away. But that DRS and Bambino's pace, we can see it coming into full effect there. Roughly 7 tenths was the gap at the start of it, and now it's come down to 6.5. Looking a bit down the grid, Unknown Elder within the DRS range of Italiano. But Rigo managing to hold it for now, staying in P5 at the moment. Looking even further down the grid, we can see Jaguar actually catching up to Miesco at the moment. Miesco obviously has his time penalties to worry about. But with 6 laps left to go, I guess we'll just focus on the front runners at the moment. So Bambino roughly 5 tenths behind Mitchell. We wouldn't want to miss anything over here as we have a yellow flag in Sector 3. And it seems to be Unknown Elder, who's unfortunately spun out there and has parked his car on the side of the road as he waits for the traffic to clear so he can go. Very unfortunate for him there, as he must have lost control of his car, as Bambino now manages to close the gap to roughly 3 tenths. This is exactly what I was talking about. I didn't really want to switch off as I would miss a bit of action, but we can see the gap between Mitchell and Bambino now, roughly 4 tenths of a second. This is all because of the help Joe Royal did for his teammates. So now Bambino trying to capitalize on that help and make the most of it. 4.5 tenths and now 5 tenths separating Mitchell and Bambino at the moment, as Joe Royal picks up the fastest time of the race with a 1:32.9. And Unknown Elder actually coming into the pits now, with only 5 laps left to go. And decides to switch on to the softs. Okay. 3.5 tenths separating Mitchell and Bambino. 5 laps left to go. And Bambino slowly gaining and gaining and gaining. Sees a small window. Maybe will opt to dive down the inside. Can't do anything as of yet. Mitchell manages to close the door and prevent him from making that possible move. But it would naturally be smarter for Bambino to just stay behind him at the moment and wait for the DRS to open up a better opportunity to overtake him heading into the next corner. And speaking of DRS, as the drivers now head down the pit straight, and with DRS wide open, will Mitchell be able to defend from this attack from the Williams driver? We can see that he's gaining very slowly, but it seems like he's a bit too far back to make the move, as Mitchell, heading into turn 1, manages to retain the race lead. Three tenths now separating the drivers as they're coming towards the first DRS zone of this track. And we can see now with 4 tenths separating the gap, DRS wide open. Will Mitchell have enough battery to defend from this overtake? We don't see any flashing red lights, so it does seem to be the case. We can see Bambino look towards the inside line, but once again, Mitchell, we've seen him time and time again hold back drivers despite not having any DRS himself to protect himself with. And we can see that once again on display here, as Bambino's unable to get past the Ferrari. With time slowly winding down now, 4 laps left to go. We can see Bambino basically riding that spoiler of Mitchell, trying to force him into some sort of mistake, but it doesn't seem to be the case. Both drivers have the same amount of life in their tires, 8 lap old. Bambino now, unfortunately, a bit further back than his last attempt. There are 5 tenths now separating him and Mitchell. Once again, nothing doing yet. Looking down the grid, seeing as how there's not really much progression coming through here, we saw Stel was within the DRS range of Joe, but it's kind of just hopping in and out of that spot, unfortunately. We can see Unknown Elder manages to get past Jaguar and promotes himself up into P12. 2 laps left to go. Oh, well, technically 3, but regardless, it's safe to say that the time is running down for Bambino at this occasion. You see no other driver really within DRS range of the other car in front of them. The closest case of that at the moment is obviously between Stel and Joe. But we've seen Stel, but Stel unfortunately kind of dipping in and out of DRS range. As we're actually nearing the end of the race, why not take a look at the penalty systems at the moment. So Italiano sitting in P5 has 6 seconds. We can see Stel in P7 unfortunately has 6 seconds. Miesco in P11, despite having a rather unfortunate race himself, currently has 9 seconds worth of penalties, as Joe Royal now picks up another 3-second time penalty. As we have a yellow flag in Sector 1, and that is Unknown Elder. So after just getting past Jaguar, he's unfortunately lost control of his car, and we can see Bambino, after making a series of mistakes, has also dropped down considerably from Mitchell. And now the gap comes down to 7 tenths of a second, roughly 8 tenths. Could Bambino possibly be just dropping back a bit to save a bit of ERS, to maybe open up a better window of opportunity to maybe attack Mitchell in the last few laps? We are on the penultimate lap. Oh, and there it is. I had a feeling that was going to happen as I watched him go over the curves there. But Bambino unfortunately picks up a 3-second time penalty, and that makes things so much more difficult for him now. Obviously, with almost 1.5 lap left to go in this race, he's not going to only have to get past Mitchell at this point, but he's also going to have to pull a 3-second gap to the Ferrari driver. And in the span of the lap, I don't know if he has enough pace to do that unless Mitchell makes a colossal mistake. And what this means is that it opens a possible window of opportunity for BR4, who is currently in P3. 5.5 seconds separating him and Bambino at the moment. Assuming BR4 can make up 2.5 seconds to the Williams driver ahead of him, he will be taking that P2 position. So what does this mean for Bambino? He'll have to throw everything he has into this final lap, and it still, I don't think, will be good enough, unless once again Mitchell makes a colossal error. But now we begin the final lap of this race, ladies and gentlemen. Lap 27 of 27. Rigo gonna win on Sunday? I have no doubt in my mind. This is just practice for him. I can't imagine that, you know, racing with tier 1 drivers and then going on to race with tier 2 on the same track. It's bound to help you out a colossal amount. Yeah, he's shown massive pace. Italiano started near the end of the grid, and despite all that, he's managed to push himself, promote himself all the way up into P5. I don't know if he's going to retain that position after penalties, but I guess we'll have to see, as Joe Royal actually does manage to get past him on this occasion with DRS. But ladies and gentlemen, with time winding down, there isn't really much we can really. I don't think we're going to be really seeing any major challenges from Bambino at the moment. He threw everything they had, and the Williams team really put together a wonderful strategy to try to slow down Mitchell to allow Bambino to get through. But I don't think it's going to be enough, as Mitchell now finally comes through the final corner of this track. It was a fantastic race to watch. Unfortunately, not as much action as we were expecting, but Mitchell now comes across the line and wins the French Grand Prix. Bambino comes across the line and finishes in P2. BR4, unfortunately a bit too far back to capitalize on Bambino's penalty, will come across the line and finish in P3, and now begins the sea of drivers with penalties. So Adam comes across the line and finishes up in P4, as I'll quickly take a look at penalties to get an idea. It doesn't look like Joe's going to be able to capitalize on that. Comes across the line, finishes in P5. Italiano finishes in P6. Stell comes across the line, finishes in P7. Pyro now a bit far back, has 6 seconds worth of penalties, and Typos right on his rear spoiler. So despite finishing P8, I'm pretty sure he's going to drop down into P9, as Typos now comes across the line and gets promoted up into P8. Miesco, obviously, he didn't have a fantastic race himself, but has 9 seconds worth of penalties. So once he comes across the line, I don't think he's going to really lose out of position to Unknown Elder. So the Red Bull driver coming across the line, finishing up in P10. Unknown Elder most likely going to finish up in P11, and Jaguar is going to round off the grid and finish up in P12. You can't take away from what was an amazing race from Mitchell. Despite everything Williams threw at him, he still managed to come out on top. And massive credit goes to both Joe and Bambino for coming up for such a strategy and being in so sync with each other that they managed to hold up Mitchell that significantly. But ultimately, it just wasn't worth it. Right then, ladies and gentlemen, there is your race winner, Mitchell. Bambino in P2 and BR4 in P3. It was a fantastic race, so thank you all so much for joining me with Tier 1 and France today. We head down next week for the Canadian Grand Prix, another exciting track, so hopefully we'll get a bit more action over there as compared to this one. But regardless, thank you all so much for tuning in, and I will hopefully see you all next week.